It's nice to hear you, man.
Thanks.
Are you ready to
Nice
go?
to be heard.
Exactly. No, we're gonna have a ball, man. You ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
Okay.
Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. And my guest today is a timeless performer, a singer, a guy who took Ben Webster's solos and turned them into vocalese. A guy who wants the truth. He wants to tell me the truth. And he has an opportunity to do that right now. Live from New York, about ready to perform again at the Jazz Forum Arts Festival as part of the Blue Note Jazz Festival. Jon Hendricks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jon, can you talk to me about in New York, the African Room, Johnny Barracuda, and Big Black? Did you ever have a chance to play in those rooms when you were first starting your career?
Oh, yes. Yes, that was something.
Can you talk about the African Room? Can you talk about some of these rooms that fostered music?
Oh, yeah, sure. Birdland was still running at that time. And it was the room. And it was owned by part of the mob,
Sure.
But that's something else that America needs to pay attention to. I've been teaching in the University of Toledo. I'm a distinguished professor of jazz there. And I teach my students 250 per class. And that America is the only country on earth that has no respect for its own culture.
Mm-hmm.
It has respect for every other culture in the world. Every city has a big art museum that costs at least $1 million or $1.5 million a year to keep up, but that's French. And every city in America has a Shakespearean company to keep up, but that's English. In other words, their own culture was kept up by the cats in the Mafia that owned it.
How did they do that? Because they allowed African American music to be played, right? Explain how the Mafia helped our culture be present.
Well, if you examine they themselves, they were African Americans. They were Sicilians who came originally from Africa to Sicily. Louis Armstrong said, "Don't be for them Sicilians, wouldn't be no jazz in America."
This is history to me, man. I love this. So there would be no jazz in America. No, but I want to hear. But here's the thing, Jon. I have this album that was put out by an oil company, and it's called Brass. And what I love about it, there's a bunch of cats from all different across the musical spectrum, but there's a track of you interviewing Dizzy Gillespie. I guess it was impossible to find a journalist that could hang with Dizzy, so they're like, yeah, let's get Jon to talk with Dizzy. But I really want to talk to you about that word, jazz. I mean, do you think that is a term that should be used, or has it been? Was it? I mean, Big Black, Danny Ray, the conga player, said, other guys, it was a white term given to African music in this country, and I look at you. You're from that generation that, Dizzy called it bebop, but what do you call it? You call jazz?
Well, bebop was the last great step forward jazz took. It was jazz up to the time it got to bebop. Well, when it got to bebop, it it was so hip. You call them, you had to have another name for it. So that's how bebop came about, the word bebop.
Do people have a proper understanding of what the music is, though, if you call it jazz? They have their own, my feeling about that term is different than other people's, but does it represent, you said that we haven't taken a step forward in that musical progression since bebop.
Well, if you tell us real story, jazz was the original term. It was what those customers at the houses in New Orleans went to do. They went there to jazz. But down in the hall, there was always one of the great piano ticklers,
Sure.
like Jelly Roll. And when somebody would go there, they get asked, "Where you been?" Oh, I went to hear me some jazz, or I went to get me some jazz,
Mm-hmm.
And those are where the words come from, not the healthiest areas, literally or linguistically either.
Well, no, that's what you're talking about. Going to these houses, to see.
I can't hear you.
Going to brothels and places to get a piece of ass. So it was called JASS. But then, when the producers and the journalists realized that it was becoming very popular and hip, they said we can't call it jazz. We have to call it jazz. So they added the Z's. Is that accurate? That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
How did you feel about that? Did you even notice that? Did you care about that at the time? And what does that mean to you?
Well, no, I worked for a branch of the mob that supported jazz in the Midwest. I was working at 12 years old with Art Tatum at a club called the Waiters and Bellman's Club, owned by the Mafia.
Wow.
And so both Art Tatum and I were able to start our careers because of these people existed. And they gave us a chance to work there and to grow in our work, because the more you do it, the easier it becomes,
You don't know this, but I've interviewed a bunch of guys that speak about you so glowingly because, do you tell me about do you remember the bass player Jon Hurd?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was my favorite bass player.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, man.
I met him in Rochester, New York.
Tell me how you met Jon.
Tell
me about the first time you met Jon.
Yeah, I met Jon in not Rochester, Buffalo, New York. I had a gig there. There's a club there that we worked all the time. And Jon was bass player in the rhythm section there. So I never had to bring a bass player to this gig because I knew Jon was there, and so I would call him from New York and say, "Man, we're coming there, April 15th to the 24th. Can you make it?" He'd say, "Yeah." And so I'd go there and we'd play together because he was like Paul Chambers of his day.
That's right.
He was the one. He was some bass player, and what a beat! He had that beat back there, like the heartbeat of an elephant.
Dude, he
boom, boom, boom.
Oh man, he talked about. He was so in love with you that he went with you to San Francisco.
I can hardly hear you. What happened?
Don't worry, we're going to work through it. He was so enthralled with you that he went with you to San Francisco to perform Evolution of the Blues.
Wait a minute. I didn't hear what you said then.
It's okay. John, obviously you guys formed a great relationship because when you went and took Evolution of the Blues into a theatrical performance, that's the reason he went to the
Hold a minute. There's something not right here. Have you got your mouth close to the
Can you hear me now?
phone?
Can you hear me? How about now?
Because I can hardly hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Just a little.
Can you talk to me, John, about Can you talk to me about the evolution of the blues when you and Jimmy Witherspoon and Pony Poindexter got together? What was the idea behind the concepts behind evolution of the blues?
Well, I thought there was time. Somebody told the story. You know, the gangsters, you know, the Mafia gave us the opportunity. They told us all about what was going on in New Orleans, and they told us a lot of things that we didn't know. And that made it possible. So then I just put the rhyme together and made up the show, which incidentally I'm seriously thinking of reopening.
I mean, I think that is an amazing idea because
I can hardly hear you. I don't understand why I heard you first. Good. Now I can hardly hear you.
All right. Can you tell me about what the Mafia...
Should I call you back?
Yeah, why don't you call... You have our number? Can I give you our number?
Wait a minute, hold on. I'll take it down.
Okay.
Okay, what is it?
520.
Wait a minute. 520.
791.
791.
7950.
Okay, I'll call you right back.
Okay, John. Bye-bye. Hey, John, can you hear me better?
Oh, yeah, it's much better.
Oh, much better. Okay, so you were saying some fascinating stuff about what the Mafia was telling you that you did not know about. What were some of the things that they told you?
Well, the thing that was what was most interesting to me was they loved the music because it was African, and they're from Sicily, and that's 17 miles from Africa. So they were all involved. They loved that music. They had heard the rhythm of the drums in their ancestral homes, you know, when they went to Sicily. But they were the ones that came to America and put it together here for us.
So they gave you confidence to know that people liked the music? Is that what you're saying? Or they just supported it because they
just didn't treat us like niggers.
Right.
They treated us like human beings.
That's right.
Like human beings.
That's right. Yep.
You know, that's the whole thing. And so they gave us the best of what they had. And the thing that made it possible was they were selling girls, you know, sex, and all kinds of drugs, cocaine, marijuana and everything, alcohol, all the alcohol they could get. I used to work at a club in Toledo where they ran alcohol down from Detroit, which was wet.
Sure.
Ohio, it was dry.
Right.
And me and our Tatum used to stand out in the hall because we couldn't go into the room where the customers were. And the guys used to come by. You know, they parked those big old Packard cars outside and come in and take off their overcoats and hats and hang them up and come past Art and me standing there and say, "Hi, kids," and they'd rub my head, you know, because rubbing a nigger's head was lucky for them.
You know, I mean, I'm, you know, it's so interesting to hear you. I mean, I'm 36 years old, and you're talking about a word that I grew up with, you know, just, it was the most vile term. And I say to myself, how is it that these cats like yourself, Cannonball, and, you know, Art Tatum, how did you guys wind up with such soft hearts, even though you just were always being suppressed? How did you wind up with such a beautiful outlook on life and how you put that into your music? How did it wind up like that? You guys were all just everyone from Coltrane. I mean, Mingus was out of his mind. I mean, obviously there were some guys that were crazy, but most of the guys I interview, just the warm hearts, and you guys weren't treated like that at all. You were just called terrible names and patted on the heads and treated like crap.
Well, you see, my father was a minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and I was his secretary when I was 11 years old. And so I had to read King James Bible every day.
Mm-hmm.
And for an 11-year-old kid, that's a task. I not only had to read it, I had to understand it and write down what he wanted to say. So that's the origin of all of it. You know, the music was the spirituals of the church. That's what the music was. And then when the Civil War was over and everything was differentiated into our society, then the church people didn't want that music played because it was not religious thing to do. But the blues are nothing but the spirituals that were sung in church every Sunday. 12-bar blues was it.
That's right. You know, and this is why you need to bring this back out, because the church is just, I mean, I don't know what's going on in the church musically now, but I'm not going to comment. I haven't stepped inside a church in a while, but I do know, when the blues came along, people said that's the devil's music. But now it's kind of like you have to say, hey, let's get let's get the blues back in the church, because the church needs to swing. You need to swing. You were the swing. You know, that's what the point is, that you and Dizzy, that conversation you guys had on this LP that I have is legendary. I mean, you guys are just rapping. I mean, he's not even playing. You guys are just talking about the sequencing of ideas. And that to me is the most cool thing, because I got 2 daughters at home and we listen to a lot of digital music, and I'll make up lyrics to it. And then I'm reading about you, and you're writing lyrics to Ben Webster horn solos. I mean, that is awesome. Well, that's ridiculous. Was that just a natural gift, or or what would you say were there these cabarets or places you would play in Toledo with Art Tatum that really gave you confidence to find your voice? How would you describe that?
Well, I think it also has to do with the fact that I got all A's, and that included English.
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of A's in the English language, and even up to the time I moved back to Toledo, where I now teach jazz in American society. When I first came into the University of Toledo, I got the only A ever given in the speech class. And the man in charge of the writing class, Milton Marks, he came from the University of Stanford out in California, and was the best-known teacher of speech, you know. And he had never given an A in 5 years, and he gave me the first A in 5 years.
But that has to do with not just articulation; it has to do with vocabulary too.
Well, that made me a big shot around the campus. Everybody knew me, and everybody wanted to know me because I got the only A he had given in 5 years.
And can you talk to the audience about how that, not the grade, but how that your ability to have control of the language helped you improvise lyrically?
Well, it helped me lyrically more than it did musically. I could write whatever I wanted because I knew the words that I wanted to say, and so it became easy for me to write lyrics that were interesting lyrics. The lyrics to Evolution of the Blues. Have you read that play?
No, I've not.
Well, I want to get you a copy.
I need it, John.
I
want.
Again.
Listen. I've been waiting. You have no idea the cats that John heard. You need to call John too. You need to reconnect with him. You two are the most. You talk the same. You guys talk the same way. I mean, the guy is larger than life. The other cat, and this is the other thing about. But I want to ask you something else. You teach a class.
Can you speak louder?
Yes, you teach a class on jazz and American society. Is that right? At Toledo?
Yeah, I wrote it myself.
Explain to me how it is, how you can do it authentically without being in the street, because as we know, jazz music is a street music. How can you teach this in the classroom?
Well, it's easier now than it was years ago. But
how is it easy? How is it easier? How is it easier?
Well, because more and more people understand a little more about it than they did 20 years ago. You know, there's been a increase in the knowledge about the music. They all understand that 40 years ago, that they all understand that there's a connection between one thing and another. You know, being free to write and sing and play anything you want to. That's lately. That's not always been.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are churches that held their congregations back. They did not like them mentioning jazz in church.
Have you been to I talked to
Hmm?
I talked to a piano player, Larry Willis, the other day, and
Yeah, I know Larry.
Larry, and he talked
Say
about.
hello for him. To him for me, will you?
I of course I will. What he talked about was the idea that when he was growing up in Harlem, all the music was out in the streets, all the culture was out in the streets. It was right there for people to take in. Sugar Ray Robinson was living in there. There you had heroes from the community there. Churches were obviously playing a big role as well. But do you why what do you feel about the stifling of culture and how that could impact our society?
Say again.
So like when you were in Harlem growing up, coming of age, the
Well,
cult
I didn't grow up in Harlem.
or
I grew up
Or in
in Toledo.
Toledo,
Hmm.
you go into the neighborhoods, people were playing music out of the storefronts, the music was coming out, it was in the streets, the culture was very apparent, it was right there. And
Well, I
today,
was singing with Art Tatum every night in the Waiters and Bellman's Club, an after-hours joint on Indiana Avenue, and I met everybody coming through there, all the orchestra leaders, Duke Ellington, Jimmy Lunsford, Andy Kirk, and his Clouds of Joy, Count Basie, everybody. Bird, Nat King Cole, Louis Armstrong, they all came when they got to Toledo. They came to the Waiters and Bellman's Club, and I worked there with Art Tatum. So I had a first class look at all that stuff that was happening. The whole sociological emergence of our cultural art form. I was in the middle of it
you
while
were.
it was taking place.
And that's what my point is, that you were taking place in it and it was very out front. Like you talked about at the beginning, you said America appreciates every other culture except its own.
Hmm.
Okay? So at that time, the confluence of the leadership and the music and the times allowed that our culture to come out and be present. But what Larry Willis was saying was, in Harlem today, none of that stuff is out front. None of that stuff is out there. It's all,
No.
and what I'm saying sociologically is that if you are stifling culture, is that a dangerous thing for a society?
Well, we've been deculturized because what they did was just take the music, and they had some great songwriters, and they used third two bar form, and guys like just wonderful writers like Rogers and Hammerstein, Rogers and Hart.
Sure.
Rogers and Hart were beautiful. And they hung around in the jazz clubs. That's where they got their inspiration from. And they all loved the big bands, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Erskine Hawkins, Jimmy Lunsford. They were loved by the American public totally. They had no trouble selling them. The audience loved them. But America, and when I say America, I mean white America, has been more like a jackass than a human being when they've dealt with their own musical contribution to the world, which is jazz.
Mm-hmm.
They still don't handle it right, Dance too. And dance also.
Why do you think that is?
Hello?
Why do you think we have not handled it well? Why?
Well, because the first thing was it was denied the respect that it deserved.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. He should have been much more respected than it was. What they did was they used the rhythmic part and the musical part to form a pop music of their own.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just taking what we had already contributed, you know.
Right. They didn't want to take it. They didn't want to give the They didn't want to give the original artists the credit, so they had to mold it into something that they felt was acceptable.
Exactly.
Do you remember?
Exactly. But
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
But I sit here today,
Mm-hmm.
and in England, I am a member of the House of Commons, and it's just for that reason. Those English lords, when they came to America, when they got off the boat, the first thing they did was go to the Waldorf, put their clothes away, and go uptown to Harlem and listen to some jazz music.
Mm-hmm.
They loved it, and they're the ones that gave it the prominence that it has today. Not the American businessmen. They still wouldn't swing if you hung them.
You know, I don't want to. I want to be clear. I think I know you're right, but there were some magical cats here that did respect it. I think about Norman Granz, or in Key.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, or so. I mean, to say that, I just feel like there were a majority of American businessmen or people that control the levers here. You're right. They didn't respect it. They didn't understand it, and they didn't want to. They did not want to put it out to the world. But the magic is still there, and those lords know when they came that they had to go. The hippest place to go was Harlem or Toledo.
Oh, yeah.
And that.
They were so funny when they told me the story. We get off the Queen when it landed in New York, and we'd assemble our drivers, and we'd tell them to take our stuff to the Waldorf Astoria, and we'd go uptown for some pancake and waffles and chicken.
Oh yeah, chicken and waffles, great stuff.
And then we'd have some jazz. And they loved it. They're so funny.
Can you talk to me about the first time that you took Evolution of the Blues to San Francisco?
Yeah. I opened it in a little theater called it on Broadway, yeah. It was a little theater, 550 seats, I think it was.
Beautiful.
And it ran there for 5 years.
5 years, and one of the guys
employed 22 people, mostly black artists. First time in the history of capitalism.
I'm going to need a script of this play immediately. But the guy one of the first guys I interviewed, he had just came over from Yugoslavia, and then he got a chance. He was playing with Vince Guaraldi, but then he had a chance, or he was mentoring. He was being mentored by Vince, but then he got a break and got to perform Evolution of the Blues with you as Larry Vukovic.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Larry's my man.
Tell me when you first met Larry and how because he talked about the emotion of those shows, and it moved him more than anything else. He, like the guys you're talking about, as an Eastern European cat, totally dug the improvisational music,
Well, he's Yugoslav.
What did I say?
And northern Italy. He was in that area.
Uh-huh.
And Larry was always a good piano player. He was really, really beautiful and swing like a dog.
What kind of media did you receive at that time? I mean, it stayed for 5 years. 5 years. That is I mean, how was it supported by the community? Were there writers? Were there, how did you keep? Who publicized it? Who put it out there to say this is the blues? This is what we are. This is what the African American experience.
Well, it had already been done in the South. So when somebody was going north, people would tell them, "Don't forget the blues." And they said, "Don't worry." The blues and the spirituals in the church have the same chords. That's where they're from. The music is directly out of the African American church. And that's a good thing. I think that's why the Sicilians liked it so much, because they're pretty close to Africa themselves.
The other cat I wanted to talk to you about, I interviewed him and he got his start with you, was another pianist on Broadway.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, the other guy I wanted to ask you about was Melvin Seals.
Who?
Melvin Seals. Does that name ring a bell? He was your piano player. He played an Evolution of the Blues on Broadway with you.
I can hardly hear you. Would you ask that again?
Yeah. Tell me about, do you recognize the name Melvin Seals?
Can you speak louder?
Melvin Seals.
Melvin Heel?
Seals. S-E-A-L-S.
S-E?
S-E-A-L-S. Yeah, he's an organ piano player. He played on Broadway, Evolution of the Blues. He also played on Tell Me the Truth, that album from 75.
Oh, yeah.
You don't, no recollection of him at all?
Yeah, I recollect that.
When was the first time you ran into Ray Charles?
All the time on the road. We ran to each other a lot on the road when I was out with Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. He loved us. He used to want us to join him.
Was he always, when he would leave you, would you say to him, "Don't forget about the blues"? And he would yell, "Don't forget about the blues" to you.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Tell me a good story about Ray Charles, would you?
Well, Ray and I hung around the airport one day. There was an accident on one of the planes landing, and so all the flights were shattered. The schedule was shattered. People didn't know when they were going to go out. So Ray and I just walked around the airport and went to the bar, had a couple drinks and something to eat, and we talked all day long about the music. And Ray says his music comes right out of his church, and his parents were not sympathetic to him making it a commercial thing either.